Imagine you're a fish, not a majestic predatory apex fish, just a scaly, mouth-breathing nobody with a tail and dreams of someday dragging yourself onto land to see what the fuss is about. But plot twist, every time someone makes the leap to land, they choke, melt, or get erased by a thunderstorm of death plants. Yeah, not ideal. See, we live in a world where oceans are terrifying. Sharks, jellyfish, bottomless pits. The beach is fun until something brushes your leg. But rewind about 305 million years and you'd have begged to stay in the water. Because what was happening on land was basically the prehistoric version of a cursed horror film. Breathing air? Bad idea. Walking around? Good luck not dying instantly. For a brief, cursed moment in deep time, water wasn't the danger zone. It was the safe zone. So what made land so awful that fish were like, nah, I'm good? Let's talk about the only time in Earth's history when staying in the ocean was your best shot at survival. Buckle up. It's Devonian time. Okay, let's take a quick field trip. 375 million years into the past. No Wi-Fi, no continents as you know them, no dinosaurs. Just a bunch of continents awkwardly clumped together in the southern hemisphere, forming a mashup called Euramerica. And everything is steamy, swampy, and weird. At this point in Earth's history, the land is only just starting to look like something you might want to live on. If you're a moss. Towering forests? Nope. Grassy plains? Don't make me laugh. What you've got is a crusty mix of early plants like Cooksonia and Rhynia, basically green noodles sticking out of mud. They're working overtime trying to get that whole photosynthesis thing going, pumping oxygen into the air and laying down roots. Big evolutionary moment, right? Yeah, but those roots? They're also screwing with everything. Meanwhile, the oceans are straight up poppin'. Coral reefs are massive and built mostly by weird sponges and algae. You've got armored fish like placoderms, cruising around like floating tanks. Trilobites are still vibing, though a little past their prime. Giant sea scorpions the size of bathtubs are out here minding their business. And honestly, if you're an animal, this watery world is where it's at. Food, check. Breathing, manageable. Not getting incinerated by sunlight, big check. Now, some brave fish, probably Tiktaalik and its bony-limbed cousins, are poking their heads above water, squinting at the moss-covered rocks like pioneers. And for a hot minute, things look promising. The land's got untapped resources, fewer predators, and lots of sunlight. Great place to set up camp, right? Well, no, because while the oceans are relatively stable, emphasis on relatively, the land is a chaotic mess barely pretending to be hospitable. And the plants? Yeah, they're not your friends. They're about to terraform the place in the worst way possible. Also, fun fact, there's no such thing as dirt yet. Not really? Soil as we know it doesn't exist. It's more like decomposing sludge with bits of sand in it. Imagine trying to walk on that with stubby proto-legs while dodging flash floods, suffocating air, and razor-sharp ferns. Not a great Airbnb, but the worst part? Nobody knows the rules yet. Everything is experimental. Animals are just trying stuff. Legs instead of fins, lungs instead of gills, and everyone's hoping they don't drop dead mid-mutation. Evolution is winging it, and the results are mixed. So, to summarize, oceans are busy but livable. Land is wild, weird, and borderline uninhabitable. And we're right on the edge of something truly catastrophic. Because in just a moment, Earth's going to hit the big red button labeled Extinction Event. And guess who suffers the most? Spoiler, it's not the fish. If you thought Earth was just going to slowly evolve life in a chill, progressive way, welcome to the Devonian, where Mother Nature hits delete not once, not twice, but at least 4 separate times. Yep, the late Devonian wasn't one big extinction event. It was more like a badly written miniseries where every episode ends with half the cast dead and no one really knows who's responsible. Let's start with the headline. Around 70% of marine species got absolutely wrecked. Coral reefs, gone. Trilobites, toast. Jawless fish, cancelled. But here's the twist. Even though oceans took a hit, The real long-term devastation was happening on land, and it wasn't because of volcanoes or meteors. Nope. It was because of plants. You heard me. Somewhere along the line, vascular plants, the ones with fancy plumbing for water and nutrients, decided to go full colonizer. Ferns, horsetails, and early tree-like plants like Archaeopteres started spreading like gossip in a small town. Their roots dug deep, breaking down rocks, forming primitive soil, and releasing nutrients into rivers and seas. Which sounds great. Except it wasn't. All that plant action sucked carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, leading to global cooling. Nice if you're sweating. Deadly if you're a cold-blooded sea creature. Also, decaying plant matter began leaching phosphates and other nutrients into water systems, which triggered massive algal blooms. Algal blooms decompose. Decomposition uses oxygen. And boom. Suddenly, you've got anoxic oceans, dead zones everywhere, and that's just the warm-up. While the ocean was quietly suffocating, land wasn't doing much better. All those new plants were throwing off the balance in the atmosphere. Oxygen levels spiked briefly, then dropped. Carbon cycles went haywire, and with no real topsoil or stable ecosystems, land was basically one big landslide waiting to happen. Erosion ran wild. Floods carried gunk into shallow seas, further smothering aquatic life. Also worth mentioning, tectonic chaos, continents shifting, mountain-building events like the Akkadian orogeny, and sea level fluctuations all threw ecosystems into the blender. Habitats vanished, coastal areas flooded or dried up. And every time things started to stabilize? Another extinction pulse. This wasn't just bad luck, this was Earth rolling natural disasters like it was trying to win extinction bingo. Now imagine being an early tetrapod in the middle of this. You've just evolved limbs. You're testing out this whole air-breathing thing, and what do you get for your trouble? Toxic mudflats, collapsing ecosystems, and skies full of greenhouse gases or acid rain, depending on the day. It's no wonder evolution basically hit pause on land animals. In fact, paleontologists refer to this period of missing terrestrial fossils as Roemer's Gap, a 15 million year stretch where it looks like tetrapods were like, yeah, we'll sit this one out. Marine life suffered, yes, but at least the water still had some semblance of oxygen and food chains. Land? Land was out here giving off full post-apocalyptic vibes. It was so bad that nothing larger than a salamander-sized creature could make it work. Forests? Gone. Rivers? Full of sludge. Air? A dicey mix of too much or not enough oxygen. So while the Devonian oceans were gasping for breath, land was just straight up uninhabitable. A solid contender for worst place to vacation in Earth history. And remember, this was the planet's first real attempt at supporting large-scale life on land. It was like watching someone try to bake a cake for the first time and setting the house on fire. So yeah, if you were alive back then and wanted to not die horribly, the best move? Stay in the ocean. Even with the occasional 30-foot armored fish trying to bite your face off, it was still the better deal. Alright, so you're a bold little tetrapod, fresh out of the water, just evolved some stubby legs, and you've got lungs that mostly work on Tuesdays. You haul yourself up onto land, all excited to be nature's newest experiment in walking. And what greets you? Not adventure, not freedom, just a hellscape of poison air, toxic sludge, unstable ground, and plants quietly planning your demise. Yeah, bad call. See, the Devonian land was technically in the process of becoming hospitable, but only in the way a house fire is technically warm. You had newly evolved vascular plants spreading out in all directions, creating the earliest forests. These trees, like Archaeopteris, were big, rooty, and extremely good at weathering rocks and pumping nutrients into soil. Sounds lovely. Until all those nutrients washed into streams and oceans, causing massive algal blooms that suffocated fish and choked oxygen from the water. But it wasn't just the water these plants were wrecking. On land, those same roots destabilized rock formations, leading to erosion so aggressive it probably gave geology anxiety. Without proper soil systems, rain just turned everything into landslides. You weren't walking across solid ground. You were flopping across a gooey, crumbling mess of proto-mud and decomposing plant goo. And the air? Oh, the air. Oxygen levels fluctuated wildly during this time. Thanks to all the plant activity, you sometimes got surges of oxygen, but then it would tank again, probably due to massive die-offs and climate shifts. Combine that with carbon dioxide crashes that caused global cooling, and you've got yourself a lovely atmosphere that alternated between freezing your blood and suffocating your lungs. And if you were really lucky, acid rain. Some researchers think increased volcanic activity and weathering from new land plants might have triggered acidic precipitation, which could have leached essential nutrients from soil and killed off land plants in massive swaths. So even the plants that ruined everything were also getting wrecked by the very environment they helped create. Poetic, really. But it gets worse. The fossil record tells us that this period, especially between 360 and 35 million years ago, is eerily quiet when it comes to land animals. This is that Romer's Gap we mentioned earlier, where vertebrate fossils just vanish. It's like life collectively said, nope, and went back to the drawing board. Even the few tetrapods that braved land during the earlier parts of the Devonian, like Ichthyostega and Acanthostega, didn't stick around long. These creatures had limbs, sure, but they were still mostly aquatic. Moving on land was more of a novelty than a lifestyle. And every time they tried to stay topside too long, nature made sure they regretted it. We're talking floods, climate swings, wildfires. Yes, lightning-struck forests were a thing, and unstable ecosystems that just couldn't support large land animals. No food chains, no predators or prey balances. Just awkward bugs the size of your foot and some ferns, doing their best to not die in a windstorm. And if all that wasn't discouraging enough, the Hangenberg event, one of the final punches of the Devonian extinction, slammed the coffin shut around 349 million years ago. This one was brutal. It wiped out most remaining jawless fish, a huge number of placoderms, and basically cleared the evolutionary table for vertebrates. On land, this meant yet another reset button. So imagine this. Every time evolution tried to build a functioning land ecosystem, something, be it plants, floods, oxygen, or just Earth having a mood swing, came along and smashed it with a hammer. Tetrapods didn't just have to evolve legs and lungs. They had to survive a planet that actively resented them for trying. So if you were an animal in the Devonian with any survival instincts, you stayed in the water, maybe found a nice reef, until it got smothered, and avoided the cursed science experiment going on up top. Because for millions of years, land wasn't just risky. It was biologically unwelcoming. Seriously, who'd have thought that the ocean, home to sharks, scorpions, and 30-foot bone-headed fish, would be the less dangerous option? Let's not pretend the oceans were handing out participation trophies and free oxygen during the late Devonian. Things were grim underwater too. The oceans were slowly suffocating, entire ecosystems were collapsing, and reef builders were going extinct faster than a trilobite in a blender. But compared to the disaster movie unfolding on land, the sea was like an all-inclusive resort. Sure, it had problems, but at least you weren't choking on the atmosphere. First off, the big, scary superstar of the Devonian seas, Dunkleosteus. Picture a 30-foot armored murderhead with a bite force strong enough to slice through bone and rivals like it was opening a can of tuna. It didn't have teeth. It had bony blades that basically acted like guillotines, and if you think it was slow and lumbering, think again. This thing could lunge forward and snap shut its jaws in about 50 milliseconds. That's faster than you can say, well, I guess I'm dead now. But as terrifying as Dunkleosteus was, it lived in a world that still had structure. Marine food chains hadn't completely disintegrated. There were prey species. There were predators. There was, crucially, oxygen, at least in patches. You might have to swim a bit to find it, but hey, that's better than walking into a forest that tries to kill you with every breath. Sure, coral reefs were getting obliterated. The massive reef systems built by stromatoporoids and tabulate corals were going through a crisis that makes modern coral bleaching look like a sunburn. Thanks to nutrient overload from land runoff, these reefs got smothered under algae and silt, and once they died, they didn't recover for tens of millions of years. Reefs, as it turns out, are drama queens. One extinction event, and they shut down for the rest of the Paleozoic. Then there were the anoxic zones, huge swaths of the ocean floor where oxygen levels dropped so low that even bacteria were like, pass. These dead zones were a direct result of the exact same land plant explosion that was turning the continents into compost piles. Excess nutrients led to eutrophication, algae bloomed, died, and decomposed, using up all the oxygen and leaving behind water that could barely support life. But again, and this is the key part, the oceans still had some room to breathe, literally. In deeper waters, or better mixed areas, fish like Cladosalace, early sharks, both Rhyolepis, armored bottom feeders, and even some coelacanth relatives still swam their little hearts out. Life adapted. Some species got smaller to deal with lower oxygen. Others developed new strategies, slower metabolisms, or migration to oxygen-rich zones. In other words, the ocean wasn't a pleasant place, but it was navigable. Ecosystems could bend. Land ecosystems, they just broke. It's also worth noting that vertebrate evolution continued in the oceans, even as it stalled on land. The fish that survived this mess would eventually give rise to the ancestors of modern bony fish, sharks, and even us. That's right. Your great times a million grandma was probably a small, unimpressive, lobe-finned fish just trying not to get eaten while the planet imploded around her. Respect. Meanwhile, back on the continents, tetrapods were vanishing from the fossil record like bad Tinder dates. Every few million years, one would crawl onto land, take a breath, and immediately wish it hadn't. So, even if the Devonian Ocean was full of things trying to eat you, melt you, or trap you in an oxygen-deprived sludge pit, at least it functioned. At least it had places to hide, food to eat, and some basic rules. Land. Land was just out here improvising. No rules, no mercy, just vibes. Deadly, toxic, ever-shifting vibes. So yeah, if you were a prehistoric fish making your first big decision in life, stay in the water or try your luck on land, the answer was obvious. Stay in the water. So after tens of millions of years of land being the biological equivalent of a flaming garbage pile, Earth finally calmed the hell down. Not because it felt bad, Earth doesn't care. But over time, the chaos simmered down just enough to let life try again. And this time, it stuck. Enter the Carboniferous period, starting around 3,009 million years ago, right after the Devonian's grand finale, the Hongenberg event. This was the last in a string of extinction slaps that cleared the stage. Many old players, like plecoderms and jawless fish, didn't make it. But the survivors? They were lean, adaptable, and ready for a comeback. The Devonian was evolution's sketchbook full of bad drafts. The Carboniferous was the start of the final product. On land, things began to stabilize. For starters, plants figured out how to make actual forests. Tall, dense, and photosynthesis happy, lycopods, ferns, and seed ferns covered the land, creating the first real ecosystems that didn't immediately implode. Soil became a thing. Rivers stopped acting like deranged fire hoses. And oxygen? Oh, oxygen came back in a big way, but I suppose at one point hitting levels much higher than today. This new atmosphere was basically nature on steroids. Insects ballooned to ridiculous sizes. We're talking dragonflies with 2-foot wingspans and millipedes the length of a sofa. Why? Because more oxygen meant you could afford to be a little dramatic. Same with amphibians. The early tetrapods, now a bit more comfortable with gravity and breathing, began diversifying. Creatures like Pteropus and Wachiria, yes, that's a real name, started taking their first successful steps into permanent land life. And this time, evolution didn't flinch. Vertebrates started getting good at this whole terrestrial dominance thing. They grew stronger limbs, better lungs, and, crucially, amniotic eggs. The biological upgrade that let animals lay eggs on dry land without them shriveling up like raisins. That was the game changer. It meant vertebrates weren't tied to water anymore. They could move inland, set up shop, and create stable populations without having to risk life and egg in a toxic swamp. In short, life finally had infrastructure. The land wasn't just a hostile experiment. It was a viable, if still weird, place to live. And because of that, it exploded with diversity. Over the next 60 million years, we got our first true reptiles, flying insects, massive forests, and an entire cast of land-based creatures that were no longer just visiting. They were here to stay. But here's the kicker. All of that only happened because of the Devonian mass extinctions. It's counterintuitive, but extinction events, as awful as they are, create opportunity. They wipe the slate, reset ecosystems, and force evolution to innovate. Without the Devonian clearing out the old, bloated lineages and chaotic ecosystems, land animals might have remained second-rate fish with stubby legs forever. So yeah, the Devonian was brutal, it was gross, it was dangerous, but it was also necessary. It set the stage for every forest, every mammal, and eventually, you. That's right. Your entire existence is built on a period when fish said, land, hard pass, and then got bullied into evolving better lungs. Funny how things work out. And just to recap, for a solid chunk of geologic time, the ocean, complete with face-biting sharks and sea scorpions, was the safe place because land was out here trying to kill everything that dared to crawl on it. So if you ever feel like life's a struggle, remember, at least you're not a Devonian tetrapod wheezing in poison air while getting smacked by tree debris. Could be worse. Now, since you enjoyed that prehistoric disaster piece, like and share this video, and also hit subscribe. Because extinction waits for no one.